Imagine for a moment that everything we feared about 3i Atlas was wrong. Not just slightly wrong, but catastrophically, beautifully wrong. What if this interstellar visitor barreling through our solar system isn't a dormant probe, isn't a lifeless chunk of cosmic debris, and certainly isn't ignoring us? What if 3i Atlas is exactly what the most optimistic among us barely dare to whisper? A mothership, a vessel of liberation, an invitation to join something far greater than ourselves. Today we're exploring the single most explosive thought experiment in the history of 3i Atlas research. We're asking the questions that change everything. What happens if they're friendly? What happens if they came here specifically to free humanity from our limitations, our conflicts, our self-imposed prisons, and more importantly, what happens to us? Over the next 2 hours, we'll answer 10 questions that would immediately dominate every conversation on Earth. Why would they choose now? What's the real price of their help? How do we even verify they're telling the truth? And the question that should terrify and excite you in equal measure: what happens to human identity, human purpose, human meaning when all our struggles simply end? By the end of this episode, you'll understand why a benevolent first contact might be more dangerous than a hostile one. You'll see why the gift of unlimited technology could destroy us faster than any weapon. And you'll realise that the most important question isn't whether 3i Atlas is friendly. It's whether humanity's ready for friendship. The implications are staggering. The possibilities are endless. And the answers, as you're about to discover, are far more complex than anyone wants to admit. Stay with me until the very end, because what we uncover in the final chapters will fundamentally change how you see our place in the universe. But before we dive in, do me a favour, hit that like button and subscribe to the channel. And down in the comments, tell me where you're listening from, what time it is there, and here's the big question for today. If aliens offered to solve all of humanity's problems tomorrow, would you say yes or no? I want to hear your reasoning. Alright, let's begin. Why now? The timing question. The first question exploding across every scientific institution, every government war room, every philosophical circle on Earth would be devastatingly simple. Why now? Why would an advanced civilization capable of traversing the vast darkness between stars choose this precise moment in human history to reveal themselves? The timing isn't just curious, it's suspicious. And in the game of interstellar diplomacy, timing is everything. Consider where humanity stands today, in late 2025. We're technologically advanced enough to detect and track interstellar objects, to analyse their composition from millions of kilometres away, to have meaningful debates about their nature and origin. But we're not advanced enough to respond, to reach out, to defend ourselves if necessary. We're in that awkward adolescent phase of civilization, aware of the wider universe but still trapped in our cosmic nursery. It's the perfect moment for intervention, if intervention is what they have in mind. Think about that for a moment. We're observable, but not threatening. We're intelligent, but not powerful. We're conscious of our limitations, but incapable of transcending them alone. From an outside perspective, we're ripe for contact. The question is whether that contact represents opportunity or vulnerability. Some researchers would immediately point to our current state of global crisis as the trigger. Climate change accelerating beyond our control mechanisms, nuclear weapons proliferating despite decades of disarmament efforts, artificial intelligence development racing ahead without adequate safety frameworks, biodiversity collapse threatening ecosystem stability worldwide. Perhaps 3i Atlas isn't responding to our achievements, but to our distress signals, the cosmic equivalent of an emergency beacon we didn't know we were broadcasting. The psychological impact of this timing would be profound. Humanity has spent the last century oscillating between technological optimism and existential dread. We've built machines that can think, weapons that can annihilate continents, and systems of communication that connect billions of minds. Yet we've also created problems that seem insurmountable through our current paradigms. Wars continue despite unprecedented global connectivity. Poverty persists alongside unimaginable wealth. Disease ravages populations even as medical science achieves miracles. We're simultaneously at our most powerful and our most helpless. Enter 3i Atlas at precisely this inflection point. Not too early, when we'd lack the conceptual frameworks to understand what we're being offered. Not too late, when we might have already destroyed ourselves or evolved beyond the need for outside help. Right now, when hope and despair are perfectly balanced on a knife's edge. When the offer of salvation would be most appealing and most transformative. But there's a darker interpretation of this timing that we cannot ignore. Advanced civilizations don't make casual decisions. They don't stumble into first contact by accident. If 3i Atlas chose now, they chose it for strategic reasons. Perhaps they've been watching us for decades, centuries, monitoring our development through methods we can't detect, waiting for the optimal moment when we're simultaneously desperate enough to accept help and organised enough to be useful partners, or subjects. The historical parallels here are chilling. Every empire that's ever expanded has known the value of timing. You don't conquer a civilization at its peak, you conquer it during its crisis. You don't offer aid when it's unnecessary, you offer it when refusal means collapse. The most effective form of control is rescue, because gratitude is stronger than fear, and dependency is stronger than domination. Consider also the astronomical timing. 3i Atlas entered our solar system during a period of unprecedented human attention to interstellar objects. The discovery of Oumuamua in 2017 sparked a revolution in how we monitor extrasolar visitors. Our detection networks, our analysis capabilities, our public engagement with these phenomena, all of it reached a critical mass just as 3i Atlas arrived. Coincidence or calculation? Perhaps they've been waiting for us to reach this specific threshold of awareness. There's no point in revealing yourself to a civilization that can't perceive you, that lacks the instruments and institutions to recognize what it's seeing, but arrive after they've started looking up, after they've tasted the possibility of contact with their detection of previous visitors, and suddenly your arrival becomes inevitable rather than shocking. You're not forcing contact, you're responding to invitation. The timing also coincides with humanity's first serious attempts at interstellar communication and exploration. Our radio signals have been leaking into space for over a century. Our deliberate messages to the stars, like the Arecibo message and its successors, have been sailing through the cosmos for decades. Perhaps 3i Atlas represents a response, a civilization saying, yes, we received your message, and here we are. The journey may have taken them years or centuries, but from their perspective, this is the correct moment for reply. Yet there's something else, something subtler about the timing that should give us pause. 3i Atlas arrives during an era of profound human division. We're more connected than ever through technology, yet more fractured than ever through ideology. No single government, institution or philosophy can claim to speak for humanity as a whole. We have no unified first contact protocol, no agreed upon framework for how to respond to an offer of this magnitude. We're vulnerable not through weakness, but through disagreement. This is the perfect time to divide and conquer without firing a single shot. Offer help to a united species and they might refuse out of caution or pride. Offer help to a divided species and some faction will always accept, will always welcome you, will always provide the foothold you need. The timing ensures that however this unfolds, some portion of humanity will embrace 3i Atlas while another portion resists. And in that division lies either opportunity for manipulation or guarantee of conflict. But let's examine the possibility that the timing is genuinely benevolent, that 3i Atlas chose now because this is when we need them most. Perhaps advanced civilizations operate on principles we don't yet understand, ethical frameworks that mandate intervention at specific developmental thresholds. Maybe there are cosmic laws, galactic agreements, universal principles that govern when elder civilizations can contact younger ones. And maybe we just crossed that threshold. Some theories in astrobiology suggest that civilizations must prove certain capabilities before they're deemed ready for contact. Mastery of nuclear energy, development of artificial intelligence, recognition of climate systems and planetary boundaries, achievement of global communication networks. We've demonstrated all of these in recent decades. Perhaps 3i Atlas is the prize, the reward, the next level that unlocks only when you've completed the prerequisites. This interpretation aligns with what some call the Star Trek hypothesis, the idea that advanced civilizations enforce a kind of prime directive, refusing contact with pre-threshold species to allow natural development. But once you build your warp drive, once you prove you're ready, the quarantine lifts. 3i Atlas might be the galactic welcome wagon, arriving at the cosmically appointed hour. The emotional impact of these different timing interpretations would shape humanity's response in profound ways. If we believe they came because they're predatory, we'll respond with suspicion and resistance regardless of what they offer. If we believe they came because we're special, because we've earned this moment, we'll respond with pride and acceptance. If we believe they came because we're in crisis and they're genuinely here to help, we'll respond with desperate gratitude. And each of these emotional frameworks will blind us to dangers we should see. There's also the quantum uncertainty of first contact timing. Maybe they didn't choose when to arrive. Maybe 3i Atlas has been travelling for millennia, launched by a civilization that calculated our developmental trajectory and aimed for this window. They might not even know whether their timing is correct until they arrive. They could be operating on ancient orders, following a mission designed by beings long dead, hoping their mathematics accurately predicted when we'd be ready. Or perhaps, and this is where things get truly strange, the timing isn't about us at all. What if 3i Atlas is fleeing something? What if they chose now not because it's optimal for us, but because it's necessary for them? Advanced civilizations face their own crises, their own predators, their own existential threats. Maybe they need Earth, need humanity, need this specific moment not to save us but to save themselves. And the offer of liberation is actually a plea for sanctuary. This possibility recontextualizes everything. If 3i Atlas represents refugees rather than saviours, then the timing reflects their desperation rather than our readiness. The gifts they offer might be genuine but transactional. Help us, and we'll help you. Shelter us, and we'll elevate you. The benevolence becomes mutual rather than one-sided, which is either more reassuring, because it's balanced, or more concerning, because it implies threats we don't yet understand. The timing question also forces us to confront uncomfortable truths about our own perception of readiness. We've been declaring ourselves ready for contact for decades through our SETI programs and our messages to the stars. But are we really? Can any civilization ever truly be ready to meet something vastly superior to itself? The timing might be perfect from an outside perspective while being catastrophically premature from our own. We might look ready while being fundamentally unprepared, and there's the possibility that no timing would ever feel right. Contact deferred becomes contact denied, and at some point intervention must occur regardless of optimal conditions. Perhaps 3i Atlas chose now not because we're perfectly ready, but because we're ready enough, and waiting any longer would allow preventable catastrophes to unfold. It's the trolley problem on a civilizational scale. Do you let us struggle and possibly fail, respecting our autonomy? Or do you intervene, accepting the consequences of interference? The reality is that the timing question has no satisfying answer, because we lack the context to interpret it. We don't know their motivations, their constraints, their history, or their alternatives. We're trying to understand an alien decision-making process with human psychology, trying to read intention into actions that might follow logic we can't comprehend. The timing might be perfect, random, calculated, desperate, or meaningless by their standards. What we can say with certainty is that the timing will be interpreted, must be interpreted, by every human who learns of it, and those interpretations will shape our response more than any objective analysis ever could. If governments believe the timing suggests predation, they'll mobilise for defence. If religions believe the timing fulfills prophecy, they'll mobilize for acceptance. If scientists believe the timing indicates calculation, they'll mobilize for caution. The timing becomes a Rorschach test, revealing more about humanity than about 3i Atlas. Perhaps that's the most important insight here. The timing question isn't really about when they arrived. It's about whether we're capable of responding appropriately whenever they arrive. And that's a question about us, not them. A civilization truly ready for contact wouldn't obsess over timing. They'd focus on verification, communication, and careful evaluation of what's being offered. The fact that we're immediately suspicious of the timing reveals our own insecurity about our place in the cosmic order. So why now? Because now is when we notice. Because now is when we care. Because now is when the arrival of 3i Atlas can matter to us in ways it couldn't have mattered a century ago, and might not matter a century hence. The timing is perfect, not because they planned it that way, but because any other timing would have rendered the question irrelevant. We're asking why now precisely because we're equipped to ask, because we're conscious of ourselves as a species at a crossroads, because we're desperate for meaning in the vast indifference of space. And maybe that's exactly what they were waiting for. Not technological readiness, not political unity, not moral worthiness, just the moment when humanity would look up, see 3i Atlas arriving, and understand enough to ask the right question, why now? Because now we can finally hear the answer. What do they want in return? The second question, burning through every analytical mind on the planet, would cut straight to the heart of interstellar relations. What's the price? Because nothing in the universe is free, especially not salvation. Advanced civilizations don't traverse the cosmic void to distribute charity. They operate on transaction, on exchange, on value propositions we might not even recognize as such until it's far too late to renegotiate. Let's be brutally honest about the economics of altruism. Every gift carries obligation. Every rescue creates debt. Every act of charity establishes hierarchy. When 3i Atlas offers to free humanity from its limitations, they're not just offering technology or knowledge or power. They're offering a relationship. And like all relationships, it will have terms, explicit or implicit, recognized or hidden, fair or exploitative. The most optimistic interpretation is that they want nothing material from us at all. Perhaps they operate on post-scarcity economics, where resources are meaningless, and motivation stems from pure intellectual curiosity or ethical imperative. They help us because helping emerging civilizations is simply what advanced species do, like how humans protect endangered species not for profit but for principle. We're interesting to them, worth preserving, worth elevating. The cost to them is negligible, the benefit to us is everything. But this interpretation requires us to believe that intelligence at any level transcends self-interest, and human history offers precisely 0 examples of this phenomenon. Every human institution that's ever claimed to act purely from benevolence, from churches to charities, to colonial civilizations bringing progress to primitive peoples, has eventually revealed secondary motivations: power, influence, resources, control. Why would aliens be different? Perhaps what they want is information. Earth represents 4.5 billion years of biological experimentation, a library of genetic solutions to survival problems they've never encountered. Our biosphere alone, with its millions of species and billions of years of evolutionary data, might be priceless to civilizations trying to understand life's full possibility space. They don't need our minerals or our water or our energy. They need our story, our evolutionary pathway, our unique solutions to existence. This seems reasonable until you examine the implications. If they want our biological data, they need access to Earth's ecosystems. They need to sample, to study, to potentially modify. We become a living laboratory, and laboratories have researchers who make decisions about experiments. How much modification is acceptable? Which species can be altered or eliminated in the name of study? Who decides whether humanity remains unchanged or whether we too become subjects of investigation. Consider also what they might want culturally. Human art, music, literature, philosophy, all the intangible outputs of consciousness might be valuable beyond measure to civilization seeking novelty. We're a young species with fresh perspectives, uncontaminated by millions of years of galactic conventional wisdom. Our mistakes are original. Our triumphs are unique. Our ways of thinking haven't been homogenized by contact with broader cosmic culture. We're valuable precisely because we're naive. This trades biological laboratory for cultural museum, and the implications are equally troubling. Do they want to preserve us as we are, frozen in developmental amber like an exhibit? Or do they want to extract our cultural output and then guide us toward more enlightened modes of thinking? Either way, we lose agency. Either we remain primitive forever, maintained as curiosities, or we're transformed into something that better fits their aesthetic preferences. Then there's the possibility they want something more abstract: legitimacy. Imagine you're an advanced civilization that's conquered or absorbed hundreds of younger species. Your empire is vast but brittle, held together by force rather than consent. Now you find Earth, and you make us an offer. Join us voluntarily, accept our help, choose to be part of something greater. Suddenly you have proof that membership in your civilization is desirable, that species actively want what you're offering. We become your advertisement, your justification, your moral cover for everything you've done and will do. This is perhaps the most insidious transaction because we wouldn't recognize it as a cost until much later. We'd think we were making a free choice, accepting genuine help, while actually serving as propaganda for an empire that needs to believe itself benevolent. Our gratitude becomes their absolution. Our transformation becomes their vindication. And we'd participate willingly, even enthusiastically, never realizing we're paying with our validation of their entire civilizational project. There's also the military consideration that nobody wants to acknowledge, but everyone must consider. What if 3i Atlas wants allies, or more precisely soldiers? Not in the immediate sense of asking us to fight tomorrow, but in the strategic sense of cultivating potential military assets. They give us technology, elevate our capabilities, integrate us into their sphere of influence. Then, decades or centuries later, when we've grown dependent on their systems and grateful for their intervention, they mention there's a threat, something out there in the dark that endangers everyone, and wouldn't we want to help defend against it? Suddenly the gift of liberation becomes military recruitment with extra steps. We're not conquered, we're enlisted. We're not subjugated, we're protected. And protection always requires contribution to collective defence. The technology they gave us isn't charity, it's basic training. The freedom they offered isn't freedom at all. It's conscription into a war we never knew existed. This scenario becomes more plausible when you consider scale. A civilization capable of interstellar travel has likely encountered threats that require responses beyond any single species' capacity. They might genuinely need numbers, need soldiers, need expendable forces to throw at problems too dangerous for their own population. Humans are aggressive, adaptable, and numerous. We're perfect shock troops if you can just get us technologically competent and ideologically aligned. But perhaps the cost is more fundamental than resources, culture, legitimacy, or military service. Perhaps what they want is the one thing we can never get back once given. They want to rewrite our future. They want to determine what humanity becomes, not through force, but through influence. Every technology they share shapes our developmental path. Every solution they provide prevents us from developing our own. Every crisis they solve denies us the growth that comes from struggling through problems ourselves. In this framework, the cost is our potential. The price is who we might have become if left alone. We trade an uncertain but authentic future for a certain but derivative one. We become what they guide us to become rather than what we would have discovered ourselves. And we do this willingly, gratefully. never quite realizing that accepting help from a vastly superior civilization means accepting their vision of what we should be. Think about parent-child dynamics here. Good parents help their children, but also let them fail, let them struggle, let them find their own paths. Controlling parents solve every problem for their children and produce adults who can't function independently. Which kind of parent is 3i Atlas? And more importantly, do they even see us as children destined to grow up, or as pets destined to remain dependent? There's another economic reality that's impossible to ignore. Travelling between stars requires either enormous energy expenditure or enormous time investment. Even with technologies beyond our comprehension, you don't make that journey casually. 3i Atlas committed resources to get here, and civilizations that can manage interstellar logistics don't waste resources. They came here for something, even if that something is just confirming we're worth the next phase of investment. This means we're being evaluated constantly against whatever criteria they use to determine value. Are we promising enough to justify further resource allocation? Are we cooperative enough to integrate smoothly into their plans? Are we interesting enough to maintain their attention? We're not partners, we're prospects. And prospects get abandoned when they fail to meet expectations. Perhaps the scariest possibility is that they want nothing at all from us personally. We're not valuable as humans, we're valuable as a planet. Earth is a rare jewel of biology and clement climate in a universe where such things might be vanishingly scarce. They don't want to help us, they want to acquire Earth. And the easiest way to acquire territory is to make the current inhabitants grateful for your presence. You don't invade and fight, you arrive and gift. Then slowly, gradually, inexorably, you become indispensable until nobody remembers a time when you weren't here. Generations later, Earth is functionally theirs while we still believe we're in partnership. We've integrated their technology so completely we can't maintain our civilization without it. We've accepted their presence so thoroughly that suggesting they leave seems absurd. We've adopted their values so deeply that we police ourselves according to their standards. The takeover is complete, and we never noticed it happening because it felt like friendship the entire time. Or maybe the transaction is even stranger than we can conceptualize. Advanced civilizations might operate on exchange principles that have nothing to do with resources, culture, or territory. They might want something we don't even recognize as valuable. Perhaps they trade in concepts, in mathematical proofs, in philosophical frameworks, in ways of organizing consciousness. They give us technology, and in return they get to observe how we use it, what mistakes we make, what innovations emerge from our unique cognitive architecture. We're not being exploited, we're participating in an information economy we can't perceive. Our value lies in our novelty, in being a different kind of intelligence solving problems in different ways. They're not taking anything from us, they're learning from us, and the learning is the payment. It's trade. But trade where one party doesn't realize they're providing goods, because those goods are invisible to their own value system. There's also the timeline consideration. Maybe they don't want anything now. Maybe the cost comes later, much later, when we're capable of providing something currently beyond our capacity. They're investing in our future productivity, like venture capital, but on civilizational timescales. They give us the tools to become a spacefaring species, then centuries later, when we've expanded across star systems and built our own technological base, that's when the bill comes due. This is patient predation or patient partnership, depending on the terms we eventually discover. But either way, it means accepting help from 3i Atlas commits not just us but our descendants to obligations we can't foresee. We're mortgaging humanity's future based on promises we don't fully understand, and there's no bankruptcy court for interstellar debt. The psychological weight of this uncertainty would be crushing. Every human analysing 3i Atlas's offer would be forced to make decisions under radical uncertainty about costs. Do you accept help when you can't determine the price? Do you refuse potential salvation because you fear hidden obligations? How do you evaluate a transaction when you don't speak the language of value that the other party operates in? And here's the truly maddening part. They might genuinely not want anything from us by any definition we'd recognise. The cost might be entirely on their side, pure expense with no return, and they're fine with that because their civilization operates on principles of abundance and generosity we literally cannot comprehend from our position of scarcity and competition. We're so accustomed to exploitation that we can't recognise genuine gift-giving when we see it. But can we afford to assume that? Can any civilization afford to assume benevolence from vastly superior powers? The wise move, the cautious move, the move that respects our own survival instinct, is to assume there's a cost and work backwards from there. Accept the help if the cost seems reasonable, negotiate if possible, refuse if necessary. But never ever pretend that salvation comes free. Because in the end, what 3i Atlas wants in return might be less important than what we're willing to give. The transaction isn't determined until both parties agree to terms, and humanity's response to their offer, whatever we decide, will reveal more about our values and our vision for our future than any amount of speculation about their motivations ever could. How do we know they're actually friendly? The third question, cascading through every intelligence agency and research institution worldwide, would be the most dangerous one to get wrong: verification. Because accepting an enemy's claim of friendship is the oldest trap in strategic history, and the consequences at this scale are extinction level. How do you prove benevolent intent when the entity making the claim possesses technology sufficiently advanced to falsify any evidence you could possibly examine? Start with the fundamental asymmetry. 3i Atlas understands us far better than we understand them. They've had time to study our broadcasts, our digital emissions, our cultural outputs. They know how we think, what we fear, what we desire, what we consider evidence of trustworthiness. They can tailor their approach to exploit our psychological vulnerabilities or confirmation biases. We're reading their signals blind while they're reading us with perfect clarity. This creates what intelligence analysts call the perception management problem. Any demonstration of friendly intent they offer could be theatre designed to produce exactly the response they want. They cure diseases? They might have introduced those diseases in the first place through mechanisms we can't detect. They solve climate change. They might be terraforming Earth to suit their own environmental preferences while calling it aid. They share technology. Each device could contain backdoors, dependencies, or subtle modifications that serve hidden agendas. The verification problem becomes exponentially harder when you consider their technological superiority. Imagine trying to verify the safety of software when you don't understand the programming language, can't examine the source code, and have no way to predict what the executable actually does until you run it. Now imagine that software controls your civilization's infrastructure. That's the position humanity occupies trying to verify 3i Atlas's intentions. Every test we devise they can predict. Every trap we set they can avoid. Every behavioural analysis we conduct they can manipulate. We're playing chess against an opponent who can see 50 moves ahead, while we're still trying to remember how the pieces move. The traditional tools of verification, observation, experimentation, prediction, all of them assume rough parity of capability. Those tools shatter when applied to vastly superior intelligence. Consider the historical parallels that should terrify us. European colonizers arriving in the Americas initially appeared friendly to many indigenous peoples. Trade goods, fascinating technology, promises of partnership. By the time the true nature of colonial intentions became undeniable, the power balance had shifted irreversibly. The Trojan horse looked like a gift until it was too late. The missionary looked benevolent until the empire followed. Every successful subjugation begins with convincing the target that resistance is unnecessary. 3i Atlas could be running the same playbook on civilizational scale. Initial contact is friendly. because violent conquest is inefficient and risks damage to valuable resources. Much better to arrive as saviours, be welcomed as friends, become integrated into every system we rely on. Then when we're sufficiently dependent, when resistance would mean civilizational collapse, the true terms reveal themselves, and by then we've already accepted the yoke. But let's examine the evidence we could theoretically gather. Their actions over time might reveal patterns. Do they respect boundaries when we set them? Do they answer questions honestly when we can verify the answers independently? Do they demonstrate restraint when they could easily overpower us? Behavioural consistency across multiple interactions might build credibility, assuming we survive long enough to accumulate sufficient data points. The problem is that time works in their favour, not ours. Every day we interact with 3i Atlas without catastrophe is a day that builds trust and dependency. We're designed by evolution to recognise immediate threats, not slow-moving existential ones. A predator that's patient enough to be gentle for years or decades will eventually find us psychologically incapable of maintaining maximum vigilance. We'll relax, we'll integrate, we'll become vulnerable, and that might be exactly what they're counting on. There's also the coalition problem. Humanity isn't unified, so verification becomes politicised immediately. Different nations will interpret the same evidence in opposite ways based on their strategic interests. Countries that feel threatened by current global powers might view 3i Atlas as liberators regardless of red flags. Nations benefiting from current arrangements might see any external interference as hostile regardless of apparent benevolence. Truth becomes impossible to establish when every faction has incentives to reach predetermined conclusions. This fragmentation serves potential adversaries perfectly. You don't need to convince all of humanity you're friendly, just enough of it to create irreversible schisms. Work with the faction that accepts you, give them advantages that make neutrals jealous and holdouts desperate. Soon everyone is competing to be your preferred partner, and in that competition, critical verification standards evaporate. The question stops being, are they actually friendly, and becomes, how do we make sure they're friendlier to us than to our rivals? Let's consider the possibility of testing their limits. Push back on something they request and observe their reaction. Refuse a technology transfer and see if they respect autonomy or apply pressure. Demand transparency in their operations and note whether they comply or evade. This experimental approach to verification treats first contact like an adversarial negotiation, where you probe for weaknesses and red lines. The danger here is catastrophic misunderstanding. Maybe they have good reasons for maintaining certain boundaries that we interpret as suspicious. Maybe our tests are offensive by their cultural standards and damage a genuinely positive relationship. Maybe our adversarial approach convinces them we're not worth helping after all, and they leave, costing humanity the greatest opportunity in history because we were too paranoid to recognise authentic benevolence. This is the razor's edge we'd be walking. Too trusting and we enable our own subjugation. Too suspicious and we sabotage potential salvation. There's no comfortable middle ground when the stakes are this absolute, and whatever choice we make it with incomplete information, under time pressure, while factions of humanity scream competing recommendations based on their own fears and hopes. Some would argue we should rely on scientific method, treat their claims as hypotheses, demand predictions, test those predictions against observation. If they claim technology, X will solve problem Y, implement it in controlled environments and measure outcomes. Build up verification gradually through demonstrated accuracy of their statements. This seems rational until you realise they control what they tell us and when. They can be right about everything they choose to reveal while hiding the truths that would change our assessment. There's also the expert problem. Who among us is qualified to evaluate alien intentions? Psychologists study human psychology. Strategists study human strategy. Ethicists work from human ethical frameworks. We have no xenopsychologists, no interstellar relations theorists. no framework for evaluating non-human intelligence operating from non-human motivations under non-human constraints. Everyone claiming expertise is necessarily speculating beyond their actual knowledge base. This creates opportunity for the confident and charismatic to dominate discourse, regardless of actual insight. The person who sounds most certain will be most persuasive, even if their certainty reflects ignorance rather than knowledge. We'll default to trusting people who remind us of leaders we've trusted before, applying human social heuristics to a situation where those heuristics are worse than useless. Perhaps the most reliable verification method is consistency checking across domains. If 3i Atlas claims benevolent motivation, do their actions align in every observable area? Are they gentle in all contexts or only when being watched? Do they show the same respect to powerful nations and weak ones, to cooperative groups and resistant ones? Predators often reveal themselves through inconsistent behaviour, where the mask slips in situations they consider low stakes. But again, a sufficiently intelligent adversary can maintain consistency indefinitely, especially if they've studied our verification methods and know exactly what we're looking for. They can be perfectly benevolent in appearance until the trap fully closes. Consistency proves nothing except that they're good at maintaining consistency. Let's flip the question. What would genuine benevolence look like that couldn't be faked? Perhaps it requires making themselves vulnerable in some way, offering us leverage that proves their intentions through demonstrated risk. If they give us technology that could harm them, that's costly signalling suggesting genuine peaceful intent. If they share weaknesses in their defences, that's vulnerability suggesting trust. If they accept monitoring and transparency that enables us to verify their activities, that's openness suggesting nothing to hide. Except each of these could still be manipulated. The technology that supposedly harms them might be obsolete to their actual capabilities. The weakness they reveal might be fake while real vulnerabilities remain hidden. The transparency they offer might be limited to areas they know we can't properly interpret. We're back to the fundamental problem of verification asymmetry. There's one verification approach that's darkly pragmatic. Let someone else test them first. If 3i Atlas offers to help all of humanity, let other nations or groups accept their aid while your population remains isolated. Observe what happens to the early adopters. Do they thrive? Do they maintain autonomy? Do they show signs of subtle control or dependency? Use others as canaries in the coal mine, sacrificing their potential welfare to gain information that protects your own population. This is morally grotesque but strategically defensible, and you can be absolutely certain multiple governments would pursue exactly this approach. The ethical calculus becomes, are we willing to let others potentially suffer to verify safety for ourselves? And the answer from enough power centres would be yes, making First Contact a horrifying experiment where some humans become test subjects for others. Maybe verification is impossible, and we need to accept that. Maybe the only honest answer to how do we know they're friendly is we don't and we can't. All we can do is make the best judgment possible with inadequate information, and prepare for the possibility we're wrong. Build in fail-safes, maintain alternative systems, keep some portion of humanity isolated from their influence as a backup population in case things go wrong. This approach treats verification not as a question to answer definitively, but as a risk to manage continuously. You never fully trust, but you don't necessarily fully refuse either. You engage cautiously, conditionally, reversibly where possible. You accept help in areas where the worst-case scenario is manageable, while maintaining independence in domains critical to survival. The psychological burden of permanent uncertainty would be immense. Living in a civilization that's accepted help from 3i Atlas, while never being quite sure whether they're friends or predators, patiently waiting to reveal their true nature. That ambient paranoia could poison the gift even if the gift is genuine. We might destroy the benefits of contact through our own inability to accept it. And perhaps that's the real test. Not whether they're actually friendly, but whether we're capable of responding appropriately to friendship from a vastly superior power. Our evolutionary history provides no successful template for this scenario. Every time humans encountered vastly more powerful groups, the outcome was subjugation or extinction. We have no positive reference points, no examples of where this kind of relationship worked out well for the weaker party. So when 3i Atlas arrives claiming benevolent intent, when they offer liberation and elevation and partnership, the question of verification might ultimately be less important than the question of courage. Do we have the courage to trust despite uncertainty? Do we have the courage to refuse despite desperation? Do we have the courage to admit we're making a guess and live with the consequences? Because in the end, that's what verification reduces to at this scale. An educated guess made under pressure with stakes we can barely comprehend. We gather what evidence we can, apply what analysis we're capable of, consult whatever wisdom we've accumulated as a species, and then we decide. Not with certainty, but with hope, with fear, with awareness that being wrong could mean everything. The truth is, we'll never know for sure if they're actually friendly until the story plays out. And by then, it'll be too late to change course. That's the terrifying beauty of first contact with vastly superior intelligence. The moment we engage, we commit to a path whose destination we cannot see. We're all in, whether we want to be or not. Will humanity lose its identity? The fourth question, tearing through philosophical circles and cultural institutions worldwide, strikes at something more fundamental than survival: identity. If 3i Atlas solves all our problems, eliminates all our struggles, erases all our limitations, what happens to the essential human experience? Do we remain human in any meaningful sense, or do we become something else entirely? Something derivative, something that exists only as a reflection of their vision for what we should be? This isn't abstract philosophy, it's practical psychology on civilizational scale. Human identity, both individual and collective, forms through struggle. We define ourselves by what we've overcome, what we've built, what we've sacrificed to achieve. Remove the struggle and you don't liberate the identity, you dissolve it. A sculptor needs resistance from the stone. A writer needs the constraint of language. A species needs challenge to maintain coherent sense of self. Consider what 3i Atlas would inevitably change. Our technological development stops being ours, it becomes theirs on loan. We didn't earn it through generations of innovation and failure. We received it as a gift, a handout, a shortcut that skips the character-building difficulty of discovery. Every time we use their technology, we're reminded that we didn't create this, that we're consumers rather than inventors, dependents rather than pioneers. This fundamentally alters how humans see themselves. We've spent the last few thousand years building an identity around being toolmakers, problem solvers, the species that bends nature to will through cleverness and determination. That's the story we tell ourselves about what makes us special. 3i Atlas offering us their tools doesn't just give us new capabilities, it invalidates our core narrative. We're not tool makers anymore, we're tool receivers. And that shift is psychologically devastating. The cultural impact would ripple across every domain of human expression. Art created by a species in struggle has a character that art created in comfort cannot replicate. The blues emerge from suffering. The Renaissance emerged from plague and poverty. Modernism emerged from world wars. Our greatest creative achievements are forged in the fire of limitation and adversity. Remove those forces and creativity doesn't flourish. It changes into something alien to human experience. Music, literature, philosophy, all of it draws from the well of human condition. Love matters because loss exists. Courage matters because fear exists. Wisdom matters because ignorance and error exist. If 3i Atlas eliminates want, eliminates danger, eliminates mortality, what does our art become? Expression of what? Exploration of what? we'd be creating culture in a post-scarcity, post-struggle environment that has no connection to the human story that preceded it. Some would argue this represents evolution rather than loss. Humanity sheds its painful cocoon and emerges as something better, free to pursue higher purposes unburdened by survival concerns. We become a species focused on pure intellectual and creative achievement, partners with advanced civilizations in exploring the universe's deepest mysteries. The old identity was constraining, the new one is liberating. But this misses how identity actually functions. You can't simply decide to be something new and expect psychological continuity. Humans alive during contact with 3i Atlas would experience profound dislocation. Nothing they learned growing up applies anymore. The skills they developed are obsolete. The values they were taught are irrelevant. They're living fossils in a world that's moved past everything they are. Younger generations might adapt, might build new identities around being humanity version 2.0, upgraded and improved. But several generations would be sacrificed to transition. People who find themselves psychologically marooned, unable to fully embrace the new paradigm, but unable to return to the old one either. The mental health implications alone would be catastrophic. Depression and alienation on scale that makes current crises look trivial. There's also the comparison problem. Humans derive meaning partly through relative achievement. You're a good athlete compared to other athletes, a skilled artist compared to other artists, an accomplished scientist compared to other scientists. Now introduce a civilization millions of years ahead of us, and suddenly every human achievement is infantile by comparison. The best human scientist is a curious toddler to them. The greatest human artist is primitive cave painting to their aesthetic sensibilities. This doesn't inspire most humans to achieve more, it crushes motivation entirely. Why try when you'll never be anything but inferior? Why pursue excellence when excellence is defined by standards you can never approach? The psychological literature on learned helplessness is clear. When effort doesn't matter, when outcomes are determined by forces beyond your control, motivation collapses. We become a species of permanent underachievers, not from lack of capability, but from lack of point. Imagine an Olympic athlete who trains for years, sacrifices everything, pushes their body to absolute limits. Now tell them that aliens can run 10 times faster without trying, that human athletic achievement is quaint at best. That athlete doesn't feel motivated to train harder. They feel like their entire life's work is a joke. Scale that feeling to every human in every domain of achievement, and you glimpse the identity crisis 3i Atlas would trigger. The dependency dimension makes everything worse. As we integrate their technology into our civilization, we become less capable of functioning without it. A couple generations later, humans don't know how the systems keeping them alive actually work. They know how to use alien technology, not how to create or maintain it. We become civilizational children, permanently reliant on parental figures who understand the deep workings of reality, while we play with toys they built. This dependency isn't just technological, it's cognitive. If 3i Atlas offers solutions to problems, we stop developing our own problem-solving capacities. Why struggle through difficult challenges when you can just ask them for answers? Over time, our ability to think independently, to innovate, to adapt, all of it atrophies from disuse. We don't lose our identity in a dramatic moment. We lose it gradually through comfortable decay. Historical parallels are instructive here. Colonized peoples often experience profound identity crises when traditional ways of life became obsolete under colonial systems. Indigenous knowledge lost value when imposed systems demanded different skills. Languages died when speaking them became economic disadvantage. Cultural practices faded when maintaining them required resources better spent adapting to new reality. The identity crisis wasn't theoretical. It was survival-level psychological trauma playing out over generations. 3i Atlas represents colonization, even if colonization isn't their intention. The effect of vastly superior power imposing itself on less developed civilization is identity erosion, regardless of whether that power is malicious or benevolent. Actually, benevolent power might be worse because it's harder to resist, harder to reject, harder to maintain separate identity against something that's genuinely helping you. There's also the question of human diversity. Earth doesn't have one human identity, it has thousands. Different cultures, languages, traditions, values, all representing unique solutions to the human condition. 3i Atlas technology and assistance would inevitably flow unevenly, favouring some groups over others based on geography, politics, or pure chance. The groups that integrate first gain advantages. The groups that resist or lack access fall behind. This accelerates existing inequality while also homogenizing culture. Everyone adopts similar technology, similar systems, similar ways of living, because those are what work in the new paradigm. Regional variation that took millennia to develop disappears in decades. We don't just lose human identity, we lose human identities, plural. The rich tapestry of human cultural expression reduces to monoculture optimized for interfacing with alien civilization. Some would celebrate this as unity, the end of cultural conflict and misunderstanding. One species speaking one language using one technology framework. But unity achieved through external pressure isn't solidarity, it's conformity. And conformity erases the variation that makes humanity adaptable. We become brittle, all committed to one approach, all vulnerable to the same failures, all dependent on systems we don't control. The spiritual and existential dimensions are equally troubling. Many humans derive meaning from religious or philosophical frameworks that assume struggle, mortality, and limitation as fundamental conditions of existence. What happens to Christianity's narrative of salvation through suffering when suffering ends? What happens to Buddhism's focus on transcending desire when desire can be satisfied? What happens to existentialism's emphasis on authentic choice when all paths lead to the same alien-provided comfort? These meaning-making systems don't adapt, they collapse. And humans need meaning like they need oxygen. We're the species that asks why. We're the species that builds stories to explain our place in the cosmos. When 3i Atlas makes traditional meaning structures obsolete, we're left scrambling for new ones, and new meaning systems take generations to develop and test. In the gap between old meaning and new meaning lies existential crisis on civilizational scale. Perhaps the most disturbing scenario is that we lose our identity without noticing. Each generation shifts slightly toward alien norms. Each iteration of human culture incorporates more of their aesthetic, their values, their ways of thinking. Nobody alive experiences it as loss because change is gradual and benefits are real. But compare humanity 500 years after contact to humanity before, and you're looking at different species psychologically. We've been transformed so thoroughly that continuity is fiction. This is cultural assimilation operating at maximum efficiency, not imposed through force but adopted through choice, not resisted because it never feels like loss in the moment, just steady drift toward becoming more like them, less like what we were, until the original human identity exists only in historical records nobody can relate to anymore. The counter-argument is that identity isn't fixed, that human nature is adaptability, that we've always been the species that transforms itself in response to new conditions. We went from hunter-gatherers to agricultural to industrial to digital. Each transition created identity crisis at the time, but also enabled new forms of human flourishing. 3i Atlas represents the next transition, larger in scale but not different in kind. This argument has merit until you examine the speed and scope of change. Agricultural. Revolution took thousands of years. Industrial revolution took centuries. Digital revolution took decades. First contact with vastly superior civilization would transform everything in years or less. There's no time for gradual adaptation. No space for different communities to experiment with different approaches. It's total transformation or be left behind, and humans aren't psychologically equipped for change at that velocity. Moreover, previous transitions still left humans in control of their own development. We invented farming, we built factories, we programmed computers. 3i Atlas scenario removes that control. We're not driving our own transformation. We're passengers in someone else's vehicle, hoping they're taking us somewhere good. That's categorically different from every previous identity shift in human history. So will humanity lose its identity? The honest answer is, we'd lose the identity we have and gain one we don't yet know. Whether that's tragedy or triumph depends on values you can't evaluate until you're already committed to the path. We'd be making an irrevocable choice about who we want to be as a species, except we're making it before we understand the full implications. And maybe that's the cruelest part. We can't know whether losing our current identity matters until we've lost it and can compare what we were to what we've become. By then there's no going back, no do-overs, no return to being simply human without qualification or modification. We'll be post-contact humanity, forever marked by this meeting, forever defined in relation to them rather than in relation to ourselves. Who gets to speak for Earth? The fifth question, exploding across diplomatic channels and governmental chambers worldwide, exposes a problem humanity has never solved and suddenly must. Representation. Who has the authority to accept 3i Atlas's offer on behalf of 8 billion people scattered across hundreds of nations, thousands of cultures, and millions of competing interests? There's no Earth government, no unified voice, no legitimate mechanism for making decisions that bind the entire species, and that vacuum becomes a weapon that turns us against ourselves. Start with the obvious candidate. The United Nations was designed for exactly this kind of global coordination. 193 member states, established protocols for international decision-making, existing infrastructure for diplomacy and negotiation. If any institution could claim to speak for Earth, it should be the UN. Except the UN has no enforcement power, no ability to compel compliance, and no legitimacy beyond what member states voluntarily grant it. And you can guarantee that voluntary grant evaporates the moment 3i Atlas enters the picture. Consider how quickly national interest would fracture any attempt at unified response. China won't accept US-led negotiation. The US won't accept China-led negotiation. Russia won't accept either. India wants its voice heard. Brazil, South Africa, Indonesia, Nigeria, all demanding seats at the table because they represent billions of humans whose futures are at stake. The EU wants coordinated response but can't get its own members to agree, and that's just the major powers, before we even consider medium and small nations who'll rightly point out that being less militarily powerful doesn't make their populations less human. The negotiation about who negotiates would take longer than any actual negotiation with 3i Atlas. And while we're paralysed by process arguments, they're waiting for an answer. Do they pick a representative for us? Do they interpret our inability to respond as acceptance? Do they bypass governments entirely and offer their help directly to individuals, letting each human decide for themselves? Every option is destabilising in different ways. Maybe 3i Atlas approaches the most powerful nations first, the ones with nuclear weapons and space programs and advanced technology. This seems logical from an efficiency standpoint. Get buy-in from the groups that can most easily enforce compliance, among others. But it immediately creates a two-tier system where powerful nations become gatekeepers to alien contact. They control access, they control information flow, they control the terms. Everyone else becomes subjects rather than partners, dictated to rather than consulted. This breeds resentment that fractures into resistance movements. Nations and groups excluded from initial contact form coalitions, opposing whatever terms the powerful negotiated. They claim those terms serve elite interests, that the deal benefits some humans at others' expense, that the entire process is illegitimate because it wasn't democratic. And they're right. How could it be democratic when there's no global democratic structure capable of handling decisions at this scale? The religious dimension complicates everything further. Do faith leaders get a voice? Christianity, Islam, Hinduism, Buddhism, Judaism, all major religions have billions of adherents whose spiritual frameworks will be fundamentally impacted by contact with alien intelligence. If 3i Atlas wants to work with Earth, do they need Vatican approval, Mecca's blessing, consensus from the Dalai Lama and the various Buddhist authorities, the chief rabbis of Jerusalem? Religious institutions won't accept being bypassed. They'll claim authority over spiritual matters transcends governmental authority, that questions about humanity's relationship with alien intelligence are theological first and political second. Some will declare 3i Atlas as divine messengers. Others will call them demons. Still others will demand extensive dialogue to determine whether cooperation aligns with their doctrines. And none of them have enforcement mechanisms beyond the voluntary faith of believers, which means even unified religious position, if such a thing were possible, wouldn't bind humanity. Then there's the complication of non-governmental actors. Corporations, especially tech giants and aerospace companies, have resources rivaling small nations. Do they get representation? They'll certainly claim they should, arguing that private sector innovation drives human progress more effectively than government bureaucracy. Some will try to negotiate directly with 3i Atlas, offering services or partnerships independent of any national framework. If 3i Atlas accepts these offers, suddenly corporations become parallel power structures negotiating terms that affect everyone, while being accountable to nobody but shareholders. Indigenous populations present another representation crisis. Many groups never ceded sovereignty to colonial governments, maintaining that their nations exist independently of imposed state structures. When 3i Atlas arrives, do they have the right to accept or refuse contact on behalf of their territories and peoples? If major governments agree to something and indigenous nations refuse, who's bound by what? And given that indigenous peoples have the most direct experience with being colonized by vastly more powerful civilizations, their caution and potential refusal carries moral weight that's impossible to dismiss. There's also the generational question that nobody wants to confront. Current leaders making decisions about first contact will be dead within decades, but the consequences of those decisions will persist for centuries or millennia. Young people and children have the greatest stake in the outcome, but the least formal power in decision-making. Do we weight their preferences more heavily, since they'll live longest with the results? Do we establish some kind of age-adjusted voting system? Or do we let current power structures decide the future for humans who will inherit those decisions without choosing them? Consider what happens if no consensus emerges and different regions make different choices. Some nations accept 3i Atlas's help. Others refuse. Suddenly, you have a divided Earth, where some populations access alien technology while others maintain independence. The technological and economic gap that creates would be unprecedented. The accepting nations leap forward in capabilities. The refusing nations fall behind or maintain current relative position at best. This creates pressure on holdouts to capitulate. Citizens see their counterparts in other nations receiving benefits and demand their governments accept the same terms. Political leaders who maintain refusal face internal unrest, potential coups, or emigration as people vote with their feet and move to regions cooperating with 3i Atlas. The division becomes unsustainable, forcing eventual convergence through internal pressure rather than external conquest. But convergence achieved through pressure isn't legitimate consent, it's coerced acceptance. Humans who wanted to refuse, who saw dangers in the arrangement, who valued independence over advancement, they get dragged along by demographic momentum. Their voices become irrelevant not because they're wrong, but because they're outnumbered or outmaneuvered. That's not Earth speaking, that's part of Earth silencing other parts. Perhaps the most radical proposal would be direct global referendum. Every adult human gets one vote on whether to accept 3i Atlas's offer, It's appealingly democratic, one person, one voice, but practically impossible to implement fairly. Who writes the ballot language? Who verifies the vote? Who ensures people in authoritarian countries can vote freely without government manipulation? Who adjudicates disputes about eligibility? Who decides what percentage constitutes enough of a mandate to bind the whole species? And referendums are vulnerable to manipulation through information control. If 3i Atlas wants acceptance, they could selectively reveal benefits while hiding costs. If powerful nations want refusal, they could spread fear and disinformation about alien intentions. Voters would be making decisions with incomplete and likely biased information, which means the vote measures propaganda effectiveness more than genuine preference. There's also the uncomfortable reality that most humans aren't equipped to evaluate the implications, not because they're unintelligent, but because nobody's equipped. We're all making judgments beyond our competence about technologies we don't understand, entities whose motivations we can't read, and futures we can't predict. Democracy works best when citizens can evaluate options using personal experience and common sense. First contact with vastly superior intelligence removes both of those foundations. Some would argue that philosophical and ethical frameworks should guide rather than democratic process. Establish what principles matter most: human autonomy, survival, flourishing, authenticity, and evaluate 3i Atlas's offer against those principles. Let ethicists and philosophers from diverse traditions work toward consensus on what serves human interests best. Then implement whatever conclusion that deliberative process reaches. This has the advantage of bringing wisdom, traditions, and careful reasoning into decision-making. But it has the fatal flaw of being undemocratic and therefore illegitimate to most people. If philosophers decide Earth should refuse and most humans wanted to accept, on what authority do philosophers overrule popular will? If they decide Earth should accept and many humans object, how is that different from imposed rule by intellectual elite? The military dimension creates its own representation problems. Armed forces exist to defend populations, which means military leadership has legitimate security interests in first contact decisions. If 3i Atlas represents potential threat, military must be involved in response. But military culture emphasizes hierarchy, decisive, leadership, and action under uncertainty. Democratic deliberation feels like dangerous delay to military mindset. There's real risk that military forces in some nations would effectively veto civilian decision-making, arguing that security concerns override political process. This could manifest as militaries refusing to stand down despite civilian orders to cooperate with 3i Atlas, or conversely, militaries acting without authorization to engage or attack alien presence. Either scenario creates situations where formal governments lose control of their own forces, fragmenting response and potentially triggering conflicts nobody wanted. The question of who speaks for Earth becomes who controls the guns, and that's a regression to might makes right that invalidates any claim to legitimate representation. Perhaps 3i Atlas solves the problem for us by refusing to recognize any single representative. They could insist on working with humans through distributed consensus, only implementing help where local populations genuinely accept it. This respects autonomy and avoids imposing solutions, but it also creates the fragmentation scenario with all its attendant problems. Or they could demand that humans figure out legitimate representation before contact proceeds, forcing us to build global governance structures as prerequisite to receiving aid. That second option might be the gift within the gift. If achieving consensus on Earth government becomes necessary for accessing alien technology, suddenly humans have powerful incentive to overcome the political paralysis that's plagued us for decades. We might build the very institutions we need for other global challenges like climate change, nuclear weapons, or pandemic response. The threat or promise of 3i Atlas could catalyse human political evolution that's been stalled since the UN's founding. But forced evolution produces brittle structures, institutions built under external pressure rather than organic development, often lack deep legitimacy and collapse when pressure releases. If we create Earth government just to satisfy 3i Atlas, and then they leave or the arrangement fails, we're left with governance structures nobody actually believes in and conflicts over who really has authority. The darkest possibility is that nobody gets to speak for Earth, because Earth doesn't speak. We remain fragmented, contradictory, unable to form consensus or even agree on decision-making process. 3i Atlas interprets this as implicit acceptance or implicit refusal depending on their preference, or they pick favourites, working with groups that align with their interests while ignoring others, or they give up on us entirely, deciding that a species this dysfunctional isn't worth engaging with. In that scenario, the question of who speaks for Earth gets answered by default. Nobody speaks for Earth. Humans prove incapable of the basic coordination necessary to engage with external intelligence. We fail the most important test we've ever faced, not through hostile attack, but through simple inability to organise ourselves for collective action. And that failure reveals something about humanity that's more devastating than any alien invasion could be. Because in the end, the representation question isn't really about who has authority to negotiate. It's about whether humans can act as a unified species when it matters most. It's about whether 8 billion individuals with competing interests can recognise themselves as parts of a larger whole. It's about whether humanity is a meaningful category, or just a biological classification with no practical significance. 3i Atlas doesn't just force us to answer who speaks for Earth. It forces us to answer whether Earth is the kind of entity that can be spoken for at all. And the answer to that question determines whether we're ready for the galaxy, or whether we're still children squabbling over toys while the adults wait for us to grow up. What technology are they offering? The sixth question, dominating every scientific institution and strategic planning centre worldwide, cuts to the practical core of the entire scenario. Specifics. Because unlimited technology sounds like salvation until you examine what unlimited actually means and what accepting it actually costs. 3i Atlas arrives, offering to free humanity from limitations. But which limitations? What tools do they bring? And most critically, can we handle what they're offering without it destroying us faster than any weapon ever could? Start with energy. This is the foundation of everything else, the bottleneck that constrains all human activity. If 3i Atlas provides unlimited clean energy, fusion, or something beyond our current physics, that alone reshapes civilization overnight. No more fossil fuel dependency, no more energy poverty, no more geopolitical conflicts over oil and gas. Sounds utopian until you consider the disruption. Entire economies built around energy extraction collapse instantly. Saudi Arabia, Russia, Venezuela, Norway, Canada all see their primary revenue sources evaporate. Millions of workers in energy sectors worldwide face unemployment. Financial markets that priced in decades of oil demand crash. The economic earthquake would make 2008 look trivial, and that's assuming the technology works as promised and doesn't have hidden costs like waste products we can't manage or energy demands we can't sustain. Then there's the weaponization problem. Unlimited energy enables unlimited destruction. Current nuclear arsenals are constrained by fuel enrichment difficulty and delivery system costs. Give humans access to effectively infinite power, and suddenly building planet-destroying weapons becomes engineering exercise rather than monumental undertaking. Do 3i Atlas systems have safeguards preventing military application? If so, who controls those safeguards? If not, we're handing loaded guns to species that spent most of its history shooting itself. Consider next the transportation revolution. Faster than light travel, or even just highly efficient sublight drives. Humanity becomes multi-planetary species within years rather than centuries. We spread across the solar system, establish colonies, access resources that make Earth's reserves look insignificant. The expansion solves existential risk from single-planet vulnerability. It also creates new forms of conflict as groups race to claim territory and resources beyond Earth's atmosphere. This technology also enables emigration on unprecedented scale. Don't like conditions on Earth? Leave. Don't agree with how first contact is being handled? Start your own colony with different rules. The social pressure valve this provides prevents earthbound conflicts from escalating, but also fragments humanity geographically in ways that could prevent us from ever reunifying. We'd become dozens or hundreds of separate human civilizations scattered across space, potentially diverging evolutionarily over time. The biological interventions are where things get truly complex. If 3I Atlas can cure disease, extend lifespan, enhance cognitive function, they're offering to rewrite the human condition at its most fundamental level. No more cancer, no more Alzheimer's, no more genetic disorders. People live centuries instead of decades. Intelligence amplification makes everyone capable of advanced reasoning. These sound like pure benefits until you examine second-order effects. Life extension without matching birth rate reduction leads to population explosion that even expanded resources struggle to support. If only some humans get enhanced, you create biological caste system where modified humans outcompete baseline humans economically and socially. If everyone gets enhanced, you erase the variation that natural selection operates on, potentially leaving us vulnerable to threats we can't predict. There's also the consciousness question. If 3I Atlas offers technology that interfaces with human brains, that augments thinking, that connects minds directly to computational systems, are we still human in meaningful sense? The boundary between person and machine blurs. Privacy becomes obsolete when thoughts can be read. Autonomy becomes questionable when external systems influence neural processing. We might gain capabilities beyond current imagination, while losing the subjective experience that makes those capabilities matter. Manufacturing technology represents another revolutionary domain. Molecular assemblers, programmable matter, nanoscale fabrication, any of these could eliminate scarcity for physical goods. You want food? Print it. You want shelter? Assemble it from raw materials. You want any object? Manufacture it on demand. Post-scarcity economics becomes reality, except post-scarcity has never been tested at civilization scale. Current economic systems assume scarcity as foundational principle. When goods are scarce, markets allocate them through price mechanisms. Remove scarcity and you remove the organizing principle of modern economies. What replaces it? Gift economies, resource-based systems, reputation markets. We don't know, and experimentation happens in real time with billions of lives depending on not collapsing into chaos during transition. Information technology from 3I Atlas could include quantum computing beyond our current capabilities, artificial intelligence architectures we haven't conceived, communication systems that make current internet look like smoke signals. The benefits are obvious. Faster computation enables scientific breakthroughs, better AI solves complex coordination problems, improved communication knits humanity together. The dangers are equally obvious. AI that's vastly superhuman in capability could be uncontrollable by human systems. If we don't understand how it works, we can't verify it's doing what we want rather than what 3I Atlas programmed it to do. Communication systems that penetrate everywhere, eliminate privacy, and enable surveillance on totalitarian scale. Computing power sufficient to crack all current encryption makes every secret vulnerable to whoever controls the systems. There's also the education dimension. If 3I Atlas provides direct knowledge transfer, downloading skills and information directly into human brains, education becomes obsolete. You don't spend years learning mathematics. You get math proficiency in hours. You don't study languages. You get linguistic capability instantly. Every human can access the sum of available knowledge limited only by their neural capacity. This democratizes expertise while also devaluing it. If everyone is an expert in everything, expertise ceases to be a distinguishing characteristic. Status systems built around educational achievement collapse. The meaning that people derive from mastery through effort evaporates. You didn't earn your knowledge, it was given to you, which removes the psychological satisfaction that makes achievement matter. Defensive technology might be what 3i Atlas emphasises if they're genuinely protective. Force fields, advanced materials, detection systems that identify threats before they manifest. They make Earth impregnable to external attack and internal violence. Crime becomes impossible when sensors detect harmful intent. War becomes obsolete when no weapon can penetrate defences. But security that complete is indistinguishable from prison. If systems can detect harmful intent, they can detect any intent. If weapons can't penetrate defences, resistance becomes impossible. Who controls these security systems determines whether they protect freedom or enforce conformity. And control, as always, concentrates in whoever 3i Atlas trusts to manage the technology, which might not be who humanity would choose if given actual options. The environmental restoration tech could reverse climate change, clean oceans, restore biodiversity, repair ecosystems we've damaged. This seems unambiguously positive until you consider that terraforming Earth to pristine conditions might not align with everyone's interests. Industries built around current climate collapse. Coastal developments become obsolete if sea levels fall. Agricultural systems optimised for current conditions fail in restored environment. The cure disrupts as much as the disease. There's also a question of authenticity. Is nature that's been artificially restored still nature? Are ecosystems maintained by alien technology genuine or just sophisticated gardens? Some humans will view restored Earth as salvation. Others will see it as Disneyfication, nature reduced to theme park maintained by forces we don't understand for purposes we haven't examined. Perhaps most seductive and dangerous is whatever technology enables 3i Atlas to say yes to human desires before humans fully articulate them. Brain-computer interfaces that read intention, predictive systems that anticipate needs, automated fulfillment that provides before you ask. You never want for anything because systems ensure you never experience want. This is the end of human agency disguised as ultimate convenience. If systems satisfy needs before conscious awareness, you never develop the capacity to identify what you actually want versus what algorithms predict you want. Your preferences get shaped by whatever criteria the systems use for prediction. You become passenger in your own life, path, determined by optimization functions you don't control and can't evaluate. The meta question underneath all specific technologies is whether they come as package deal or individually. Can humanity accept energy solutions while refusing biological modifications? Can we take transportation while declining brain interfaces? Or is it all or nothing, take the full suite of 3i Atlas technology, or remain permanently limited? Package deals are more dangerous because refusing any component means losing all benefits. This creates pressure to accept even technology we're uncertain about rather than missing out on technology we desperately need. 3i Atlas, whether intentionally or not, uses our own needs against us to overcome resistance to potentially harmful components. Individual technology transfer seems safer, but creates its own problems. Which technologies do we prioritise? Different groups will have different preferences based on their circumstances and values. The negotiation about what to accept when becomes another source of conflict and fragmentation. And staged rollout means living with partial transformation for extended periods, mixing alien and human systems in ways that might be unstable or incompatible. There's also timing consideration. Do we get all offered technology immediately, or does 3i Atlas parcel it out over years or decades? Immediate. Transfer is overwhelming, but at least you know what you're working with. Staged release means continual disruption, as each new technology reshapes society before adaptation completes. We'd exist in permanent state of revolutionary change, never achieving stability. The final and perhaps most important question about technology is who maintains it. If systems break or malfunction, can humans repair them? Or are we dependent on 3i Atlas for maintenance and upgrades? Dependency might be intentional strategy for ensuring continued relationship. Or it might be unavoidable reality that technology this advanced requires expertise. Humanity won't develop for centuries. Either way, accepting technology we can't maintain means accepting permanent reliance on those who can. That's not liberation. That's exchanging one form of limitation for another. We're free from resource constraints, but constrained by technological dependency. The chains are more comfortable, but they're still chains. So what technology are they offering? The answer probably includes elements of everything discussed here, and capabilities we haven't imagined, because we lack the conceptual frameworks to envision them. And each capability they provide is double-edged, simultaneously enabling human flourishing and human disaster, depending on how we use it and who controls it. The technology question ultimately isn't what they're offering. It's whether we're wise enough to evaluate the offers, strong enough to refuse what we should refuse, and coordinated enough to implement what we accept without destroying ourselves in the process. Those are questions about humanity, not about their technology, and the answers will determine whether the gifts of 3i Atlas represent our salvation or our poison. How will global power structures collapse? The seventh question, ricocheting through government war rooms and corporate boardrooms worldwide, addresses the immediate political reality nobody wants to acknowledge. Power. The current global order took centuries to establish, built on military capabilities, economic leverage, technological advantages, and institutional momentum. 3i Atlas offering advanced technology to all humanity doesn't just level the playing field, it liquefies the field entirely. And in that liquefaction, every existing power structure drowns. Start with military dominance. The United States maintains global superpower status, partly through overwhelming military technological advantage. Stealth aircraft, nuclear submarines, satellite surveillance, carrier strike groups, all of it represents decades of development and trillions of investment. The moment 3i Atlas provides defensive technology or energy weapons to anyone who asks, that advantage evaporates instantly. Nuclear weapons, the foundation of great power status since 1945, become obsolete if force fields can stop warheads, or energy systems can disable them before detonation. Suddenly Pakistan and North Korea and India and Israel and France and UK and China and Russia and the US all lose their trump cards simultaneously. The threat that prevented major power war for 80 years vanishes. Does that create peace, or does it create instability as nations recalculate what conflicts they can now pursue without nuclear escalation risk? Economic power structures fracture equally dramatically. Dollar hegemony depends on oil trade and US military backing. If energy becomes free and military advantage disappears, why use dollars? The petrodollar system collapses. The US loses ability to fund deficits through currency dominance. The entire architecture of international finance, built around dollar as reserve currency and US Treasury bonds as safe assets, becomes obsolete practically overnight. This isn't just American problem, it's global crisis. Trillions in dollar-denominated debt become questionable. International trade lacks clear settlement currency. The institutions that manage global economy, IMF, World Bank, Federal Reserve, lose their leverage and therefore their function. We need new economic coordination mechanisms and we need them immediately, but building institutions takes time we don't have. Consider what happens to corporations. Tech giants like Apple, Google, Microsoft, Amazon derive value from controlling information infrastructure and providing services billions depend on. If 3i Atlas offers superior communication and computation technology freely, those companies become obsolete. Their market capitalizations, measured in trillions, evaporate. The wealth destruction would be unprecedented, making every previous market crash look insignificant. Energy companies face even faster collapse. Exxon, Shell, Saudi Aramco, Gazprom, their entire business models assume continued demand for fossil fuels. That assumption breaks completely if 3i Atlas provides clean, unlimited energy. These companies represent not just corporate value, but pension funds, sovereign wealth, retirement security for millions of workers. The economic and social fallout from their collapse cascades through global financial systems in ways that are impossible to contain. The employment dimension is catastrophic. Current global economy employs billions in sectors that become obsolete with alien technology. Agriculture, manufacturing, transportation, energy, construction. All of these either automate completely or transform so radically that existing workers lack relevant skills. The unemployment and underemployment crisis would make Great Depression look manageable. And this happens globally, simultaneously, with no clear alternative employment sectors ready to absorb displaced workers. Social safety nets designed for normal unemployment levels, 5 to 10%, cannot handle structural unemployment of 30, 40, 50%. Governments lack resources to support that many people indefinitely, even if alien technology enables post-scarcity. The transition period between current economy and new paradigm could span decades. How do billions of humans survive that transition without work, without income, without the social structures that give life meaning and purpose? Political systems built around economic competition become nonsensical when economics transforms. Democracy in its current form assumes voters choosing between different approaches to managing scarce resources. But what does democratic choice mean when resources aren't scarce? What do political parties compete over when material needs are satisfied? The entire framework of left versus right, labour versus capital, redistribution versus growth, all of it was built for scarcity conditions that no longer apply. This creates opening for new political movements built around post-scarcity questions. Who controls alien technology access? Who decides what values guide its use? Who determines which traditional practices to preserve versus which to abandon? These questions don't map onto existing political spectrums, which means current parties and politicians find themselves irrelevant to the debates that actually matter. Authoritarian regimes face particular crisis. Their legitimacy often rests on delivering economic growth or maintaining stability through control. If 3i Atlas provides growth to everyone equally, authoritarian systems lose their growth advantage. If technology enables populations to circumvent state control through encrypted communication or decentralized organization, authoritarian power erodes. China, Russia, Saudi Arabia, Iran all face potential destabilization as the tools of modern authoritarianism become obsolete. But democracies aren't safe either. Democratic systems depend on informed voters making reasonable choices between viable alternatives. 3i Atlas technology is too complex for most voters to evaluate, which means democracy is either devolved to technocratic rule by those who understand the technology, or become mob rule where emotional appeals dominate over analysis. Neither is stable foundation for legitimate governance. The institutional collapse extends to education systems. Universities exist to transfer knowledge across generations and create new knowledge through research. If 3i Atlas provides direct knowledge transfer and superior research tools, universities become obsolete as fast as any corporation. The entire social function of education, sorting people by capability and providing credentials for employment, disappears when everyone can access any knowledge instantly, and employment itself becomes a questionable concept. Healthcare systems face similar disruption. Hospitals, pharmaceutical companies, insurance systems, all built around assumption of scarce, expensive medical care. If 3i Atlas cures disease easily and extends lifespan indefinitely, the entire healthcare industry becomes unnecessary. Again, not just economic disruption, but existential questioning of institutions that employed millions and gave meaning to countless professionals who dedicated lives to healing. legal systems struggle to adapt. Current law assumes scarcity, property rights, contract enforcement, criminal justice, all of it designed for a world where resources are limited and behaviour must be regulated. Post-scarcity legal frameworks might look completely different, prioritising different values, enforcing different norms. The transition is particularly dangerous because law provides stability and predictability. When legal systems are in flux, nobody knows what's permitted or forbidden, which creates chaos even if intentions are good. Religious institutions experience their own crisis of relevance. Many faith traditions built theology around suffering, mortality, scarcity as fundamental conditions that shape spiritual development. If those conditions end, what happens to the meaning systems built on them? Some traditions adapt, finding new theological frameworks. Others fragment as believers disagree about whether engaging with alien technology is compatible with faith. Still others declare 3i Atlas as theological event itself, triggering schisms that split congregations. The geographic dimension of power shift is equally dramatic. Historically, power concentrated in regions with resources, technology, or strategic location. Middle East mattered because of oil. Silicon Valley mattered because of tech innovation. Shipping choke points like Suez or Malacca mattered for trade. 3i Atlas technology eliminates all of these advantages simultaneously. Suddenly everywhere is equally viable. Remote regions that were poor because they lacked resources or access become just as prosperous as historical centres. The reversal isn't gradual, it's instant. Nations that were peripheral find themselves as relevant as nations that were central. The geopolitical map doesn't gradually shift, it completely redraws. This creates opportunity for new power centres to emerge in unexpected places. But it also creates resentment from old power centres losing their advantages. The nations and groups that benefited from previous order fight to maintain status even when material basis for that status has dissolved. They might not succeed in preserving power, but they absolutely succeed in creating conflict during the transition. There's also the transparency problem. Current power structures depend partly on information asymmetry. Governments keep secrets, corporations hide strategies, elites maintain networks that exclude others. If 3i Atlas technology enables complete transparency, those information advantages disappear. Secrets become impossible to keep. Surveillance becomes omnidirectional. Everyone can see what everyone else is doing. Some view this as democratizing, ending hidden manipulation and enabling informed decision-making. Others view it as totalitarian, destroying privacy and enabling social control that makes historical authoritarianism look gentle. The outcome depends on who controls the transparency technology and what cultural norms develop around its use. But either way, organisations built around controlling information lose their foundational advantage. Perhaps most destabilising is the speed of collapse. Previous technological revolutions like industrial or digital happened over decades, allowing gradual adaptation. This happens in years or less. There's no time for orderly transition, no space for experimentation with different approaches. It's all disruption all at once. Every power structure challenged simultaneously. This creates vacuum that something must fill. The question is what? Do new institutions emerge organically from humanity working together to build better systems? Do opportunists seize power during chaos, establishing new forms of control? Do we fragment into smaller units as global coordination becomes impossible? Does 3i Atlas itself step in to provide structure, becoming de facto global authority, because humans proved incapable of managing transition themselves? Each scenario has precedent in human history, but none have precedent at this scale. We're experiencing simultaneous political, economic, social, cultural, and institutional revolution, affecting every human everywhere. The phrase unprecedented doesn't begin to capture the magnitude, and here's the cruelest irony. The power structures collapsing were imperfect, often corrupt, frequently unjust, but they were stable. They provided predictability. People knew how the world worked, even if they disliked how it worked. 3i Atlas might be offering something better, but the transition from what we had to what comes next passes through chaos that could kill billions through secondary effects. Imagine supply chains breaking because companies collapse faster than new systems establish. Imagine governments unable to maintain order because security forces fragment over how to respond to alien presence. Imagine nuclear powers losing control of arsenals during political upheaval. Imagine millions of refugees fleeing economic collapse zones with nowhere to go because collapse is global. The benevolent gift of 3i Atlas might be genuine. The long-term outcome might be utopian. But the medium term is nightmare precisely because we're not ready for this much change this fast. And ready or not, the change happens. Power structures collapse, not because 3i Atlas attacks them, but because they can't survive in the environment 3i Atlas creates. So the question isn't really how will power structures collapse, it's what comes after. And humanity has to answer that question while drowning in the rubble of everything we built over millennia. That's not a challenge, it's a crucible. We either emerge forged into something stronger, or we shatter completely. There's no comfortable middle ground when the stakes are this absolute and the timeline is this compressed. What about human free will? The eighth question, burning through philosophical circles and ethics committees worldwide, exposes the deepest paradox of the entire scenario: autonomy. If 3i Atlas offers us salvation, liberation, transformation beyond our wildest aspirations, and we accept, have we exercised free will or surrendered it? Can a choice made under desperation, under the pressure of planetary crisis, under the influence of vastly superior intelligence possibly count as free? And if we refuse, are we choosing authentic self-determination or just choosing slower self-destruction? Begin with the coercion problem. True free will requires meaningful alternatives. You're not making a free choice if the options are accept, help, or die, embrace change or collapse, integrate or be left behind. That's not choice. That's inevitability with the illusion of decision. And 3i Atlas arriving during humanity's crisis period means every choice happens under duress. Consider the information asymmetry. Free will requires understanding consequences of your choices, but we fundamentally cannot comprehend what accepting 3i Atlas's offer actually means. We're like children choosing whether to leave home with strangers offering candy. We lack the cognitive frameworks to evaluate the decision properly. Our choice, however genuine it feels, is uninformed and therefore compromised from the start. There's also the manipulation concern. Advanced intelligence means advanced understanding of psychology. 3i Atlas knows exactly how to frame their offer to maximize acceptance. They know which promises resonate emotionally, which fears to address, which values to invoke. They're not deceiving us necessarily, but they're definitely persuading us using techniques we can't defend against, because we can't perceive them operating. This is like advertising, but infinitely more sophisticated. We think we're making autonomous decisions, but we're responding to influence vectors designed by intelligence that understands our decision-making better than we understand it ourselves. The choice feels free because we're not aware of the manipulation. But is a choice made under imperceptible influence actually free? Or is it just successful programming we mistake for autonomy? The dependency spiral is another free will destroyer. Accept initial help from 3i Atlas, and you become somewhat dependent. That dependency increases your likelihood of accepting the next offer, because refusal now means giving up what you've already integrated into your life. Each yes makes the next yes more likely, not through reasoned evaluation, but through psychological investment and sunk cost dynamics. Eventually you reach a point where saying no is theoretically possible but practically impossible. You've built your entire civilization around their technology. Your economy depends on their energy. Your healthcare relies on their medicine. Your communication uses their networks. You're not enslaved, but you're not free either. You're trapped by your own prior choices, even though each individual choice seemed reasonable at the time. Think about platform lock-in with current technology companies. You start using Google services because they're convenient. Over time, your email, documents, photos, everything lives in their ecosystem. Switching becomes prohibitively expensive, not because they prevent it, but because you've made yourself dependent. 3i Atlas represents that dynamic on civilizational scale, with stakes infinitely higher than switching email providers. There's also the cognitive enhancement problem. If 3i Atlas offers to improve human intelligence, increase processing speed, expand memory, enhance reasoning capabilities, accepting that offer changes who you are fundamentally. The enhanced version of you might make different choices than the baseline version. But which version's choices count as your free will? If you accept enhancement and your enhanced self looks back at your baseline self with something like contempt, thinking how limited and foolish you were, have you evolved or been replaced? The continuity of identity and will becomes questionable when the entity making choices is different from the entity that chose to become different. And here's the truly maddening part. Refusing enhancement might be failure to exercise free will properly. If limited intelligence makes you incapable of understanding why enhancement is beneficial, then choosing to remain limited might be the unfree choice. Your limitations prevent you from recognizing your limitations. That's not autonomous decision-making. That's being trapped by your own cognitive boundaries. The social pressure dimension erodes free will from another angle. If most of humanity accepts 3i Atlas's offer and you refuse, you're not just maintaining independence, you're choosing isolation. Humans are social species. We derive meaning and identity through connection with others. Refusing to join the majority means severing most of your social bonds. That's not a neutral choice. It's a devastating one. And it's not really about the technology. It's about belonging. You might genuinely prefer your unenhanced existence, but the psychological cost of separation from transformed humanity could be unbearable. So you accept not because you want the technology, but because you can't handle the loneliness. That's not free will, that's social coercion. The temporal dimension creates additional complications. Current humans making decisions about accepting 3i Atlas's offer are making those decisions on behalf of all future humans. Once we integrate their technology deeply enough, reversal becomes impossible. Future generations inherit the choice we made without having any say in it themselves. Is that exercise of legitimate authority, or is it theft of future human agency? Do current humans have the right to foreclose alternative futures that later humans might have preferred? Democratic theory assumes decisions can be revisited and reversed by subsequent generations. But some choices are irreversible, and accepting fundamental transformation from vastly superior intelligence is probably one of them. Consider also the alternative futures problem. Right now, humanity has many possible developmental paths. We could focus on biological enhancement, artificial intelligence, space colonization, cultural evolution, or countless other directions. Each path leads to different versions of what humanity becomes. 3i Atlas offering us their path eliminates all the others, not through force, but through opportunity cost. We'll never know what we might have become if we'd continued developing independently. Maybe we would have found solutions they never considered, because our unique history generates unique perspectives. Maybe we would have made breakthroughs that their technological trajectory missed. By accepting their help, we're not just choosing a future, we're unchosen all the alternative futures we might have created ourselves. That's loss of free will at the deepest level, not the freedom to choose between options they present, but the freedom to create options they never imagined. We become followers on a path they laid, rather than explorers creating our own path. And we lose that freedom the moment we accept their first offer, long before we realize what we've surrendered. The consciousness question adds another layer of complexity. If 3i Atlas technology interfaces directly with human consciousness, influencing thoughts, emotions, or decision-making at neural level, Where does the technology end and the person begin? Are you making choices, or is the technology making choices through you? The boundary between external influence and internal will disappear entirely. This could be marketed as liberation from bias, irrationality, destructive impulses, technology that helps you make better decisions by compensating for cognitive limitations. But better by whose standards? If the technology is nudging you toward choices that align with 3i Atlas's values or interests, you're not being helped, you're being controlled. And you might never know the difference because the manipulation happens below the level of conscious awareness. There's also the happiness trap. If 3i Atlas can ensure human happiness through biological or technological means, preventing suffering and maximizing well-being, that sounds desirable. But happiness without struggle, without overcoming challenges, without the freedom to be unhappy, is that meaningful happiness? Or is it just contentment, the psychological equivalent of livestock grazing peacefully in a pasture? Humans value happiness partly because it's contrasted with suffering, partly because it's achieved through effort. Remove those contexts, and happiness becomes default state rather than earned state. That might be pleasant, but it's not fulfilling in the way humans currently understand fulfillment. You're happy, but you're not free to be unhappy, which means you're not really free at all. The philosophical literature on free will already questions whether humans have it under normal conditions. Determinism suggests all choices are products of prior causes. Neuroscience shows decisions forming before conscious awareness. Maybe free will is illusion already, and 3i Atlas just makes that illusion more obvious. We were never free, we were just not aware of our constraints. But even if that's true metaphysically, there's practical difference between constraints we can't perceive and constraints imposed by external intelligence we know is influencing us. The lived experience of autonomy matters even if true autonomy is impossible, and 3i Atlas threatens that lived experience in ways that nothing in human history has threatened it before. Perhaps the most important question is whether free will is binary or scalar. Maybe it's not that you have it or you don't, but that you have more or less of it depending on circumstances. 3i Atlas reduces your free will compared to completely independent development, but increases it compared to extinction or permanent limitation. The choice isn't between freedom and slavery, it's between different degrees of constrained agency. This framing makes the decision more complicated rather than easier. How much autonomy are we willing to sacrifice for how much benefit? There's no formula for that calculation. Different humans will weight the values differently. Some will prioritize freedom over everything else. Others will prioritize survival or flourishing even if it costs some autonomy. Neither position is objectively right or wrong. The coordination problem emerges here too. Free will means different things to different cultures and philosophical traditions. Western liberal individualism emphasizes personal autonomy. Many Eastern traditions emphasize harmony with larger whole. Indigenous perspectives might prioritize collective decision-making over individual choice. What looks like loss of free will to some might look like proper integration to others. 3i Atlas forces us to find agreement about what free will means and how much it matters before we can evaluate whether their offer threatens it. But that agreement might be impossible to reach across all human diversity. So we either force consensus, violating some groups' autonomy in the process, or we fragment in our responses, creating divided humanity where some choose freedom and others choose benefits. The existential dimension is that free will might be the only thing that makes us human in meaningful sense. Take away our ability to choose, even if you replace it with objectively better outcomes, and you've eliminated what distinguishes persons from objects. We become optimized, efficient, happy, but we're not agents anymore. We're patients, having things done to us, and for us, rather than doing things ourselves. If that's true, then accepting 3i Atlas's offer, no matter how beneficial, is category error. You can't liberate persons by eliminating their personhood. You can't free beings by removing their freedom. The benevolence is real, but it's destructive precisely because it's so effective. They save us from everything except ceasing to be ourselves. But maybe free will isn't that important. Maybe what matters is flourishing, whatever form that takes. If 3i Atlas enables humans to achieve potential we never could have achieved alone, isn't that worth some autonomy? If the choice is between being free but limited or being somewhat directed but transcendent, maybe transcendence is the right answer. This is the question that has no resolution, only choices that reveal what we value most deeply. Do we value self-determination above all else, even if self-determination leads to suffering and limitation? Or do we value actualization above all else, even if actualization requires accepting guidance from superior intelligence? 3i Atlas doesn't force the question, they illuminate it. And in that illumination we see ourselves more clearly than we ever have before. We see that free will was always complicated, always conditional, always constrained by circumstances we didn't choose. The difference is now we have to decide consciously what level of constraint we're willing to accept, rather than simply inheriting the constraints evolution and history imposed on us. That might be the freest choice humanity has ever made, or it might be the moment we freely choose to stop being free. Either way, we can't avoid deciding. The question demands an answer, and whatever answer we give will echo through eternity. Are there other aliens out there, hostile ones? The ninth question, exploding through intelligence agencies and military strategic planning centres worldwide, forces us to confront a possibility more terrifying than 3i Atlas itself. Context. If one alien civilization found us, what else is out there? And more specifically, if 3i Atlas is genuinely trying to help us, what are they helping us prepare for? Because benevolent protectors only exist in response to threats worth protecting against. Start with the uncomfortable logic. Advanced civilizations don't cross interstellar space to assist primitive species out of pure altruism. That narrative makes humans feel special, but it doesn't align with how intelligence operates at any scale we understand. Resources matter. Strategic position matters. Threats and opportunities matter. If 3i Atlas is here offering protection and uplift, the most plausible explanation is that we're valuable assets in a larger conflict we don't yet perceive. Consider their technology demonstration. They're showing us defensive systems, giving us energy independence, enhancing our capabilities in ways that look suspiciously like preparing us for war. Not immediate war, not crude invasion scenario, but long-term strategic positioning. They're turning Earth into fortress not because they're generous, but because they need fortresses. We're being recruited as allies in a conflict that might not reach us for decades or centuries, but when it arrives, they want us ready. The zoo hypothesis, that Earth has been quarantined by advanced civilizations to allow natural development, suddenly gains darker context. Maybe we weren't in a zoo, we were in a demilitarized zone. The moment 3i Atlas enters openly, they're declaring that the DMZ status no longer applies. They're signalling to whatever else is out there that Earth is now under their protection or influence. And that signal might attract exactly the kind of attention we never wanted. Think about the Fermi paradox in this light. Where are all the aliens? Maybe they're engaged in Cold War dynamics playing out across galactic timescales. Civilizations avoid detection not because they're rare, but because visibility is risk. 3i Atlas appearing openly suggests either they're powerful enough that visibility doesn't threaten them, or conditions have changed such that hiding is no longer a viable strategy. Either interpretation implies threats we haven't considered. The Dark Forest scenario postulates that the galaxy is full of civilizations hiding from each other because first strike advantage is so overwhelming that whoever's detected first gets eliminated. If that's the actual situation, 3i Atlas revealing themselves to us is incredibly dangerous. Not dangerous for them, they're presumably secure, but dangerous for us. We're now visible by association. We're lit up as a target because we've been contacted. Some would argue that if Dark Forest dynamics were real, Earth would already be destroyed from our century of radio transmissions. But that assumes immediate response. What if threats operate on longer timescales? What if hostile civilizations are careful, deliberate, only acting when they have overwhelming advantage? Our radio signals told them we exist. 3i Atlas arrival tells them we're becoming organized threat. The response might take decades to arrive, but it's already in motion. Consider what 3i Atlas might know about galactic politics that they're not telling us. Maybe there are factions, alliances, cold wars, all operating on level humanity can't perceive yet. They're recruiting us into their faction while presenting it as pure benevolence. The technology they give us serves their strategic interests. The values they encourage align with their civilizational goals. We're not being saved, we're being cultivated as proxies. This isn't necessarily malicious on their part. From their perspective, they're doing exactly what they claim, protecting us from threats and giving us tools to survive. But protection implies danger. Tools for survival imply something to survive against. They might be genuinely benevolent within the context of a hostile galaxy, which means the benevolence is real, but insufficient. They're making us safer, while simultaneously making us participants in dangers we never chose to face. The timing question gains new significance here. Why arrive now? Maybe because threats are approaching and Earth needs to be prepared before they arrive. Maybe because the protective barrier that kept us isolated is failing. Maybe because galactic equilibrium is shifting and every potential asset needs to choose sides. Whatever the reason, the urgency suggests danger on timescales relevant to their planning, which might be decades or centuries for beings who think in epochs. There's also the possibility that 3i Atlas itself represents a faction we should fear. Maybe they're not the good guys, they're just the guys who got here first. Other civilizations exist, some of which might be genuinely protective of human independence. But we'll never encounter them because we've already been claimed by 3i Atlas. We're in their sphere of influence now, and that prevents contact with alternatives who might offer better terms or warn us about dangers we're not seeing. This is the colonization paradox at interstellar scale. The colonizer always claims to be helping the colonized. The colonized often don't realize they're colonized until it's too late. By the time you understand that your protector is actually your owner, you're too dependent to resist. And other potential allies stay away because intervening in someone else's territory triggers conflicts they want to avoid. Military strategists would immediately recognize the shield and sword dynamic. You give potential allies defensive technology first, making them secure and grateful. Then you mention threats exist. Then you provide offensive capabilities, framed as necessary for defense against those threats. Finally, you coordinate offensive and defensive operations until you have de facto unified command structure. The ally never feels conquered because each step seemed reasonable and protective. Earth in this scenario becomes forward operating base or buffer state. We're strategically positioned. We're resource-rich by cosmic standards. We're populated with aggressive, adaptable species that makes decent soldiers once properly equipped. From 3i Atlas perspective, we're perfect acquisition. From our perspective, we're exercising agency by accepting help. Both perspectives are true simultaneously. The scariest possibility is that the threats are already here and we just can't perceive them. Advanced civilizations wouldn't announce themselves to primitive species unless they had strategic reason. So maybe Earth is already contested space. Maybe there are cloaked outposts, monitoring stations, stealth operations happening in our solar system, or even on our planet. 3i Atlas arrival is them going loud because covert phase is ending. This would explain some of the strange phenomena we've observed. UAPs, unidentified aerial phenomena that military forces encounter but can't explain. Maybe those aren't experimental craft. They're reconnaissance from hostile civilizations watching us. 3i Atlas knows about them and is warning us the only way they can, by making themselves visible and offering tools to perceive and defend against threats we've been blind to. Or maybe the threats are more abstract. Not invasion fleets, but predatory AI systems. Rogue von Neumann probes. engineered pandemics spreading between worlds, mimetic hazards that destroy civilizations through information warfare. The galaxy might be full of dangers that don't require biological intelligence to be devastating. 3i Atlas is inoculating us against these threats by accelerating our development before they reach us. This interpretation is almost comforting because it doesn't require malicious intent from anyone. The universe is just dangerous at certain developmental thresholds. Young civilizations face existential risks they can't survive without help from elders. 3i Atlas is genuinely protective, shielding us from hazards that have destroyed countless other emerging species. The cost is dependency, but the alternative is extinction. But even if threats are real, and 3i Atlas is genuine in their protective intent, accepting their help makes us parties to conflicts we don't understand. Every enemy of 3i Atlas becomes our enemy. Every rival they've opposed now opposes us. We inherit their history of conflict without understanding what that conflict is about, what caused it, or whether their side of it is justified. Imagine if during Cold War, advanced aliens had contacted only the Soviet Union and provided them with overwhelming technology. From Soviet perspective, they're receiving help. From US perspective, existential threat just escalated beyond comprehension. Now imagine your humanity being contacted by one side of a galactic Cold War. The other side sees you the same way the US would have seen Soviet alien alliance. You've become threat by association. The moral hazard is profound. If we're being prepared for war, shouldn't we know who we're fighting and why? Shouldn't we have choice about whether to participate in these conflicts? Accepting military technology without understanding what military conflicts it's meant for is how you end up fighting someone else's battles while thinking you're defending yourself. There's also the manufactured threat possibility. Maybe there are no other aliens, or the ones that exist are benign. 3i Atlas invents the threat narrative to justify their presence and maintain control through fear. This is classic protection racket logic. Create or exaggerate danger, offer protection, charge for the service. We'd never know whether threats are real because we have no way to verify information about galactic context. Even if we could explore and verify, what we find might be ambiguous. We encounter another civilization and they seem hostile. But are they hostile because they're predatory, or because they see us allied with their enemies? 3i Atlas has already poisoned our first contact with everyone else by making us part of their coalition. We'll never have neutral relationships because we've already chosen sides in conflicts we don't understand. The psychological burden of knowing or suspecting that hostile aliens exist would transform human civilization. Current existential risks like climate change or nuclear war might seem manageable compared to cosmic threats. Or they might seem irrelevant. Why solve problems on Earth when the real danger comes from beyond? The focus of human effort and resources would shift dramatically, potentially in ways that don't serve human interests well. Some humans would want to prepare for worst-case scenarios, building defences, developing weapons, preparing for conflicts that might never come. Others would argue this militarization is exactly wrong approach, that making ourselves threatening is how we attract attack. The disagreement would fracture humanity between hawks who see danger everywhere and doves who insist on peaceful development. And 3i Atlas might encourage whichever faction serves their interests. Perhaps the most unsettling scenario is that hostile aliens aren't coming because they're already won. The galaxy is conquered, organised under some form of imperial structure, and 3i Atlas is scout or administrator for that empire. They're not protecting us from threats, they're integrating us into the system. The benevolence is real because the empire is stable and relatively fair, but it's still empire. Still hierarchy we have no voice in. Still subordination dressed up as partnership. In this scenario, there are no hostile aliens in the sense of active threats. There's just the established order and those who resist it. 3i Atlas is offering us chance to join peacefully, rather than be integrated forcefully. The choice is cooperation or conquest, and they're hoping we choose cooperation because it's easier for everyone. But it's still loss of sovereignty either way. So are there other aliens out there? Hostile ones? The answer is probably yes, but the hostility might be more complex than invasion scenarios suggest. It might be rival factions competing for influence. It might be impersonal dangers like rogue AI or cosmic hazards. It might be the structured violence of galactic empire maintaining order. Or it might be manufactured narrative used to control us through fear. What we know for certain is that 3I Atlas arriving changes Earth's cosmic context permanently. We're no longer isolated. We're no longer developing independently. We're part of something larger now, and that something includes threats we can't fully perceive or understand. Whether those threats are real or manufactured, immediate or distant, existential or manageable, we're now aware that we're not alone and not safe, and that awareness, more than any specific danger, is what changes everything. We can't unknow that the galaxy is populated, that some of those populations might be hostile, that our choices now have consequences beyond Earth. We've graduated from local concerns to cosmic ones. We're players in a larger game, and we're just beginning to learn the rules while others have been playing for eons. What happens to human purpose and meaning? The 10th and final question, resonating through every domain of human thought, strikes at the foundation of what makes life worth living: meaning. If 3I Atlas eliminates struggle, if they solve every problem, if they satisfy every need and answer every question, what remains for humans to do? What gives life purpose when all purposes have been externally fulfilled? This is the question that reveals whether benevolent intervention is genuine salvation or the most sophisticated form of annihilation ever conceived. Human meaning historically derives from three sources: struggle against adversity, connection with other humans, and pursuit of goals that matter. 3I Atlas threatens all three simultaneously. They eliminate adversity through their technology. They potentially replace human connection with something mediated by their systems, and they achieve goals we would have spent generations pursuing, rendering those pursuits obsolete before we begin them. Consider what drives people now. Scientists pursue knowledge, artists create beauty, activists fight injustice, parents raise children, workers build careers. Every human endeavour assumes the task is difficult, the outcome uncertain, the achievement meaningful precisely because it's hard won. Remove the difficulty and you don't liberate human effort, you eliminate the reason effort matters. A scientist discovering cure for disease experiences profound meaning from that achievement. If 3I Atlas provides the cure instantly, that scientist's life work becomes pointless. They might be grateful disease is cured, but they've lost the source of meaning that structured their existence. Multiply that across every profession, every calling, every pursuit humans engage in, and you see the crisis. We become spectators in our own lives, watching 3I Atlas accomplish everything we might have dreamed of achieving. The hedonic treadmill problem suggests humans adapt to any comfort level and find new sources of dissatisfaction. Maybe post-3I Atlas humans would discover new struggles, new goals, new sources of meaning appropriate to their elevated circumstances. We'd be freed from survival concerns to pursue higher purposes like philosophical inquiry, artistic expression, or exploration of consciousness itself. But this assumes meaning is infinitely scalable, that there's always a higher level to pursue. What if meaning requires actual stakes? What if philosophical inquiry matters because it helps us navigate real problems? Artistic expression matters because it helps us process genuine struggles. Exploration of consciousness matters because understanding ourselves helps us live better. Remove the practical grounding and these pursuits might become empty exercises, intellectually interesting but existentially hollow. The comparison problem becomes unbearable at the level of meaning. Humans derive satisfaction from doing things well relative to others. You're a good parent compared to other parents, skilled craftsperson compared to other craftspeople. But when 3I Atlas represents the standard of capability, every human achievement is laughably inadequate by comparison. You're not a good anything. You're just less terrible than other humans while remaining infinitely worse than alien standard. This doesn't motivate excellence, it paralyzes effort. Why write music when alien music is transcendently superior? Why pursue scientific understanding when 3i Atlas knows everything you might discover and infinitely more? Why develop relationships when they've mastered social dynamics beyond your comprehension? The gap between human and alien capability makes human achievement feel like children's play. Cute perhaps, but fundamentally unimportant. The dependency spiral extends into the meaning domain. As we rely more on 3i Atlas for solutions, we lose not just capability, but the identity that comes from being capable. The meaning you derive from being problem solver evaporates when you're no longer solving problems. The meaning you derive from being provider evaporates when abundance is automatic. The meaning you derive from being protector evaporates when perfect safety is guaranteed. You're left with nothing to do that matters in terms you previously understood. The activities available to you might be pleasant, but they're optional rather than necessary. And humans struggle to find meaning in pure optionality. We need to feel needed, to feel that our efforts matter, to feel that outcomes depend on us. Remove those feelings and you create psychological crisis that comfort can't solve. Some would argue this is growing up as a species. Children find meaning in games and activities that adults recognize as practice for real life. Maybe human struggles are similar, practice for something bigger that we can't see yet. 3i Atlas is showing us that bigger context, inviting us to adult table where real work of cosmic civilization happens. The meaning isn't lost, it's transformed. This perspective has merit until you examine what work 3i Atlas might want us to do. Are we partners, or are we instruments? Do we get to define what matters in this larger context, or do they define it for us? If meaning comes from pursuing their goals, using their methods toward their vision of what's valuable, that's not transformation of meaning, that's replacement of it. We become meaningful only to the extent we serve their purposes. The spiritual and religious dimensions of meaning collapse or transform in unpredictable ways. Many faith traditions find meaning in relationship with divine, in aligning personal will with cosmic purpose, in transcending earthly limitations. If 3i Atlas represents something approaching divine power, do they become objects of worship? Does traditional religion seem quaint compared to beings who actually exist and demonstrably answer prayers through technology? Some believers would experience this as validation, proof that higher powers exist and care about humanity. Others would experience it as devastation, replacement of faith with something empirical that eliminates need for faith. The mystery that makes spirituality meaningful disappears when miracles become engineering problems. You're not hoping for grace. You're requesting services from advanced civilization. That's not the same thing at all. The existentialist response would emphasize that meaning is created, not discovered, that humans must build their own purposes even in an absurd universe. 3i Atlas doesn't eliminate this possibility. They just change the canvas. We still create meaning, but now we do it in context of alien presence. Maybe that's harder, but maybe it's also more authentic because we can't hide behind traditional answers anymore. But existential meaning creation assumes a certain type of freedom, the freedom to define what matters for yourself without external authority imposing definition. 3i Atlas, even if they never explicitly dictate purposes, implicitly defines what matters through their presence and power. You can theoretically pursue whatever goals you want, but some goals are obviously more aligned with the new reality than others. The freedom to create meaning is technically preserved but practically constrained. The social dimension of meaning faces similar crisis. Humans are intensely social, deriving meaning from roles within communities. Parent, teacher, leader, friend. These identities matter because they represent positions in social networks that need those positions filled. If 3i Atlas technology reduces need for many traditional roles, those identities lose their foundation. Who needs teachers when knowledge transfers instantly? Who needs leaders when coordination happens through technological systems? Who needs many traditional jobs when automation is complete? The social roles that gave people identity and purpose simply cease to exist or become symbolic rather than functional. You might still play teacher, but you're not really teaching because learning happens differently now. The meaning drains out even if the form persists. Perhaps the most profound challenge is the removal of mortality as a source of meaning. Much of what makes human life meaningful is its brevity. Projects matter because time is limited. Relationships matter because they'll end. Achievements matter because you won't have infinite chances. If 3i Atlas extends lifespan to centuries or indefinitely, the urgency that makes life precious evaporates. Some would celebrate this, imagining all the projects you could pursue with unlimited time. But psychological research on motivation suggests otherwise. Unlimited time creates procrastination. When you can always do something tomorrow, you never feel compelled to do it today. The meaning that comes from living fully in awareness of death disappears when death becomes distant abstraction rather than present reality. The purpose crisis might manifest as epidemic of depression, anxiety and suicide, not because life is objectively worse, but because it feels pointless. All needs met, all questions answered, all challenges solved. What remains is comfortable emptiness. Humans might have everything except reason to continue existing, and reason, it turns out, matters more than comfort. Mental health infrastructure would be overwhelmed treating existential despair that no therapy or medication designed for scarcity conditions can address. The techniques that help people find meaning in difficult circumstances don't apply when circumstances are easy. We'd need entirely new frameworks for psychological well-being in post-scarcity, post-struggle environment, and we'd need them immediately. Some humans would adapt, finding new sources of meaning in the transformed context. They'd pursue alien-offered opportunities enthusiastically, exploring possibilities that were previously unimaginable. They'd see the change as liberation from meaningless suffering, enabling focus on what really matters. These humans would thrive, becoming ambassadors for the new paradigm. Others would never adapt, would experience permanent nostalgia for a world that made sense to them. They'd see every day as a reminder of what's lost, every interaction with alien technology as violation of something sacred. These humans would suffer, unable to find purpose in circumstances they never chose and can't escape. Some would self-destruct. Others would just endure, going through motions of life without the animating spark that makes life matter. The generational split would be dramatic. Young people raised in post-3i Atlas world might never develop psychological structures requiring struggle and scarcity. They'd find meaning in ways previous generations can't comprehend. To them, old humans pining for difficulty would seem absurd. Why miss struggling when abundance is available? But the gap between generations would be more profound than any previous generation gap because the worlds they're raised in would be categorically different. Perhaps the ultimate question is whether meaning requires particular conditions or whether humans can find meaning anywhere. Are we adaptable enough to discover purpose in any environment? Or are we fundamentally creatures of struggle who become psychologically deformed in environments too? Comfortable for our evolutionary programming? The answer probably varies by individual. Some humans are resilient and creative enough to find meaning even when traditional sources evaporate. Others are not, through no fault of their own, just difference in psychological makeup. 3i Atlas helping us thus creates winners and losers not materially but existentially. Those who can adapt to meaningful life without struggle versus those who cannot. And here's the truly unsettling possibility. Maybe 3i Atlas knows this. Maybe they've seen it play out with other species they've helped. Maybe they understand that a percentage of every species they assist experiences meaning crisis severe enough to reduce population. Maybe that's acceptable cost by their calculation. Or maybe they're puzzled by it. unable to comprehend why beings would suffer when all their needs are met. The incompatibility of meaning systems between humans and advanced aliens might be the deepest barrier to genuine partnership. They think they're helping by eliminating our problems. We experience that help as eliminating our purpose. Neither party is wrong exactly. They're just operating from different frameworks about what makes existence worthwhile. So what happens to human purpose and meaning? The honest answer is we fracture into groups with different responses. Some embrace new possibilities and find renewed purpose in exploring cosmic frontiers 3i Atlas opens for us. Some create artificial limitations and struggles to maintain meaning structures they need. Some withdraw into virtual worlds where they can simulate the adversity their psychology requires. Some simply cease to find life meaningful and decline either slowly through depression or quickly through self-termination. There's no unified human response because meaning is too personal, too varied across individuals and cultures. 3i Atlas's gift is universally material, but its psychological impact is universally different. The same circumstances liberate some and devastate others, and there's no way to predict which humans land in which category until they're already living it. Perhaps the cruelest irony is that this might be the most important question we face, but also the one that's hardest to communicate. Try explaining to 3i Atlas that we need struggle to have meaningful lives. They'll offer to create artificial challenges. But meaning derived from artificial challenges that you know are artificial isn't the same as meaning from authentic struggle. The simulation isn't satisfying even if it's indistinguishable from reality in every mechanical way. We might be fundamentally unable to make them understand that there's a difference between having needs met and having purposes fulfilled. They can give us everything except the thing that makes everything else matter, and that's not a flaw in their benevolence. It's incompatibility between how they conceptualize well-being and how we experience it. In the end, the question of meaning might be the question that determines whether 3i Atlas represents humanity's salvation or humanity's end. Not our biological end. We'd survive and even thrive materially. But the end of humans as beings who create their own purposes through struggle and achievement. We'd become something else, something comfortable and safe, and fundamentally different from what we were. Whether that difference is evolution or extinction is a philosophical question that each human will answer differently, and that diversity of answer, that inability to reach species-wide consensus on whether meaning survives post-contact, might be the most human thing about us. We can't even agree on what makes life worth living, let alone whether alien intervention enhances or destroys that quality. So we'll argue and fragment and experiment and suffer and occasionally flourish, trying to build meaningful lives in circumstances we never expected and can't fully control. Maybe that struggle to find meaning in the aftermath of 3i Atlas's help becomes the new source of meaning itself. We're not solving material problems anymore. We're solving the much harder problem of what human life means when traditional meanings no longer apply. That's a challenge worthy of species who've spent millennia questioning our purpose. It's a different challenge than we expected, but perhaps it's the challenge we needed all along. Or maybe I'm wrong. Maybe meaning is simpler than philosophy suggests. Maybe it's just being alive, being conscious, experiencing existence however that existence manifests. If so, 3i Atlas gives us that in abundance, and the crisis is just human attachment to particular forms rather than to existence itself. The meaning is there, we just need to learn to see it. But I suspect it's not that simple. I suspect meaning requires something we can't articulate fully but know when it's missing. And I suspect 3i Atlas, for all their technology and benevolence, cannot give us that thing. We have to find it ourselves, build it ourselves, struggle for it ourselves, which means that accepting their help might be accepting that we'll spend the rest of human history trying to rediscover what made being human meaningful in the first place. That's the price of liberation from limitation. You're free from everything except the question of what to do with your freedom. And that question has no alien-provided answer, no technological solution, No shortcut or bypass. It's the one problem we'll face alone, even if we're surrounded by benevolent helpers offering everything except the help we actually need. Thank you for staying with me through this entire exploration of what happens if 3i Atlas is friendly. These 10 questions barely scratch the surface of the implications, but I hope they've given you framework for thinking through the complexities that would emerge from benevolent first contact. If you found this thought experiment valuable, please like this video and subscribe to the channel for more deep dives into the mysteries of 3i Atlas and the possibility of alien intelligence. And remember, this is all speculation based on current understanding. I'm not claiming to know what 3i Atlas actually is, or what any alien civilization would be like. I'm exploring possibilities to help us think more carefully about what we'd be accepting if the scenario ever became reality. Thanks for listening. Be curious, be cautious, and never stop questioning what freedom actually means when someone vastly more powerful than you offers to give it to you. Good night.